This is the best time of year to look at a piccolo crop.
So this is a perfectly ripened piccolo tomato.
Piccolo variety, yeah.
We all know we need to eat more vegetables and fruit.
My goodness, it's so surprising, isn't it? There's nothing on the ground.
These are a variety called centenary.
They're sort of sweet, not intensely flavoured, but nicely flavoured.
There's that 5 a day target, along with steadily rising rates of obesity and the chronic diseases that follow in its path. Plus, what looks like a new government appreciation of the link between diet and the public's health. But if we're going to eat more tomatoes, berries, leafy greens, carrots, potatoes, and all the rest of it, where will it all come from? Well, as we heard in Dan Saladino and Jack Thompson's recent edition of the food programme, Why is Africa Feeding Us?, the market is pushing us towards cheaper imports, with British horticultural firms leasing and buying land in Africa, Southern Europe, and elsewhere to grow a lot more of what we can actually grow here. All of which is the context for this government's new plan to boost UK horticulture. What should be in that plan? Well, that's what this programme is about.
If anything, what's happened in the Strait of Hormuz and in the Middle East demonstrates that we do have to make sure we're resilient. I think in the past, because we've not had much trouble with food supply for many, many, many years, a lot of people have taken it for granted. It's always on the shelves. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to know how it got there. I'm not that complacent about it.
That was Angela Eagle, DEFRA farming minister, speaking to us with the very first details about her department's upcoming horticulture sector growth plan. We'll hear more from her later. Our evidence gathering took us to 2 big fruit and veg growers, one now investing overseas, and the other looking at an empty field with planning permission for a new glasshouse, but who's unable to start the building. Clearly, there's a problem. Let's get to our research, beginning in Kent, the Garden of England.
If we want to see some picking, we need to go right now. Just go in here.
This is Tim Chambers, owner and founder of Kent-based fruit grower WB Chambers. They grow about 3.5 tons of strawberries a year, along with raspberries, blueberries, and asparagus.
Yeah, we have 26 sites growing crops through Kent into Surrey and in Portugal.
We'll talk about that later. What's happened to your picking? Where do most of your pickers now come from?
They're mainly from the Stan countries, so Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, so a long way over, on the borders of China.
Do you have any locals picking?
No, none.
No.
The government decided to make it much harder for local people to come to work. All we needed to get from a local person was a name and an address. That law of unintended consequences is now the people who come, they're not migrants because they all go home. You can earn good money picking, but you can only earn good money picking for, say, 4 or 5 months of the year. A good picker here will earn £1,000 a week, and you do that for a few months and you go back to Kazakhstan. That is good money.
After walking up and down hundreds of metres of tabletop strawberries, we failed to find any pickers because they'd finished their morning stint and gone off for lunch. A pity, because the availability of pickers and how much they cost is key to the next part of Tim's story.
What percentage of your costs are labour, roughly?
It's pushing 60%.
It's a very, very difficult time for people in the horticultural industry.
With the wage increases that we have year on year on year, with the difficulty in terms of getting planning permission for facilities that we need to invest in infrastructure. My issue is all the things I've spoken about have all been government policy. They haven't been driven by a supermarket, they've been driven by government policy. And that's my issue. The supermarket is I wouldn't say a force for good. They supply a lot of food at reasonable prices for an ever-growing and demanding population. I have a choice. I don't need to deal with them. Of course, with my investment in farming, yes, I unfortunately do need to deal with them, but it's still an option. They don't have to buy from me.
They don't. They can chase globe strawberry around the world, which is what puts you in this position, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You, in fact, have moved to Portugal, or some of your works?
We've bought into a business in Portugal because in the UK we have labour rates which are now costing the business over £15 an hour. In Portugal, it's less than half that.
So how big an investment is this for you? I mean, what?
Millions.
See? No wonder you're a cheery guy. You're talking in millions.
But it's all leveraged. What I do is like being in a casino. I could lose a lot of crop if we had a frost. I could lose a lot of crop if the government suddenly decided that wages had to be put up by 10%, or they decide to cancel visas. There's no assurance from the government that I can get labour even next year. Yet I'm being asked to invest millions of pounds up front in order to create a crop next year. No other industry would do this. If the government said to Nissan Cars, build a plant in Swindon and employ 1,000 people, but we're not going to tell you what the labour is, and we're not even going to tell you if you can get 1,000 people, what would Nissan Cars do? Let's say, yeah, jog on, we're going to go and invest in France or Denmark or somewhere else. What we do is absolutely crazy. The only reason why we do it is we've done it for years and years and years, and so far we're still in business.
So what's the difference then between the Portuguese government and this government?
They're still within the EU. So that means there is subsidy payments, which allows farms to take positions, invest in capital infrastructure, which we don't have now. Our own fruit and vegetable aid scheme was pulled.
I mean, I was going to ask you about the producer organisations, the POs.
Yeah.
As you say, it was brought to a close last year, not been replaced.
Nope.
So what difference did that make?
It gave us a 5-year view into the future of a grant scheme that we knew was going to be available. And so that gave us confidence to invest. It was a match-funded scheme, and so it cost the government 40 million a year. And then it was match-funded by growers to a tune of another 40 million a year. To give you a much better certainty of having fresh fruit and vegetables, the government decided to pull that one.
Because the important point about POs, these this thing that came to an end last year, was that it provided a way of smaller, medium-sized growers to get to sell.
Well, it didn't allow them to sell. They could keep investing even if they had a relatively bad year. And this business, you have to keep investing. Trees grow and then they come out. Strawberry plants need a year or 2 years and then they can be replanted. By the time they decide, oh dear, that was a bit foolish, we need to replace that, it'll be too late.
But they are in the business, this government, of setting up an horticulture sector plan. If you were in charge of this plan, what would be essential for you?
Sustainability, because the way I see the government acting is that they are looking for bigger farms, larger players to take a much bigger control over supply side. I think that's risky from a point of view of feeding the country. The diversity and the number of farms and the way each farmer did something slightly different gave much more resilience to our food production system than 3 or 4 massive farms producing 80% of what we eat. If one of those goes down, we're in a lot of trouble.
There seems to be a thinking now that, in fact, the health of the nation is linked to what you're growing here. Do you see this?
I have seen the government initiatives on trying to get us to eat more healthy and how fruit and vegetables are an important part of that diet that they would like us to eat. But I don't see it in any practical way of increasing supply from the UK. They want us to eat more fruit and veg, but they don't actually make it easier for producers to supply that need. I'm not looking for growers to make a lot of money or supermarkets to put up prices to afford it, but we must look at ways of being able to produce more fruit and vegetables in the UK, and that's environmental as well as economic.
Fruit grower Tim Chambers of berry producer WB Chambers. He's one of roughly 4,000 fruit and veg growers in the UK, mostly selling their produce through the supermarkets and surviving just through economies of scale. Out of that group, it's the small to medium growers who are most at risk, as Tim said, since the EU grant scheme that was used to fund producer organisations, groups of smaller businesses who were able to market their fruit and veg collectively, was closed down last December. The loss of these medium-sized and small growers is already being felt, from the loss in diversity in what fruit and veg are grown here, and in economic benefits to isolated rural areas, including in the far southwest.
I'm Guy Singh-Watson, organic farmer and vegetable grower and the founder of Riverford Organic Farmers.
What would you say the mood is amongst growers today? Growers in general and maybe organic growers in particular?
Pretty much in my lifetime, there used to be a lot of horticulture, especially around the coasts where there's protected from frost and so on. They could grow early potatoes and cauliflowers in the middle of the winter. But they're pretty much all gone, so there's no one left to be upset. British horticulture has become concentrated in the hands of really half a dozen major players who are the ones that have the supermarket contracts, and pretty much everything else, I'm exaggerating a bit, but yeah, it's very, very difficult to buy an English new potato now. You know, all those growers have gone. I mean, to my mind, that's a tragedy. It's a loss of a whole industry and a bit of culture, and then all the socioeconomic benefits that go with having a sort of vibrant agriculture and vibrant countryside, whether that's in the pub or the church or the village hall or the local school, all have suffered.
This government putting together a horticulture sector plan, which does feel like a big opportunity to do things differently. What would you think needs to be in a horticulture plan for Britain?
Well, we desperately need more diversity in our growing base. In terms of scale of farms, we probably need more mixed crops on farms, and we need them to be spread out more around the country. In terms of how you retain those smaller growers, I mean, I would love to see it be a condition of granting permission for a supermarket that they give over 10 parking spaces for there to be a local produce market in their car parks. I think that should absolutely be a condition of them being there. And I think actually it would even benefit the supermarket, because people would like to go there because they like to actually see fresh produce that's not wrapped in plastic, and ideally meet the farmer who grows it. But, we want to encourage people to eat more fruit and vegetables for health purposes. So I would suggest that high street greengrocers should be rate exempt.
You think that organic fruit and veg should specifically be mentioned and addressed in this plan?
I do. I would argue that. I'm an organic farmer. I would love to see more organic farming. I think there is more resilience. We haven't used any synthetic fertiliser on the farm for 40 years. And it makes no difference to us if the Straits of Hormuz are closed. Whereas if you're dependent on urea or ammonium nitrate, and the price has probably gone up 50% in the last 2 or 3 months, and I'm guessing will go up more. You are very susceptible to these global changes. I mean, it is so difficult for people from non-farming backgrounds without land to get into farming. And I think that's a tragedy. I mean, so often we hear the voices of the NFU and established farmers basically arguing for the status quo. But you never hear the voice of all the people that are excluded by the status quo, all the people who would like to get into farming, there are lots and lots of them, really determined people who have gone out and learned the trade and are prepared to work hard and often bring new ideas. And, I really would like to see farming and horticulture in particular welcoming those new entrants, as I see in France, as I see in Holland, actually. I don't know, what are we up to, the average age of a farmer now? I think I'm 65 and I'm not far off the average.
You have sold Riverford to its staff and in a sort of John Lewis model, but you have reverted to growing fruit and veg on your own farm. What made you go back to it? You might have put your feet up and gone surfing, right?
Well, I'm getting a bit old for surfing, for one thing, but I just love growing vegetables. It's the most fulfilling, that and my family, the most fulfilling thing in my life, really. And I'd really, I'd sold Riverford to its workers and it became employee-owned, walked off with a fair wedge of cash, some of which I used to buy quite a small farm just up the valley, never intending to grow vegetables. But here we go. I'm growing 50 acres of veg, turning over £500,000, and I just love it, actually. And I'm not very good at putting my feet up. I actually think farming, and probably in particular horticulture, we have a lot more to contribute than just food, actually. A sensible agricultural policy would tie all those things together and deliver on all sorts of levels rather than just focusing on the price of food, which has led to this, just outsourcing the problem, globally to the lowest bidder, which at the moment seems to be Senegal. I mean, I don't really think that is what most of the British food buying public want to support.
Guy Singh Watson, veg grower, founder of Riverford Organic Farmers and advocate for small farms. That voice of the status quo he mentioned, the National Farmers Union, still has significant influence on what happens to horticulture in this country. As Martin Emmett, chair of the NFU's Horticulture and Potato Board, told producer Nina Pullman, his team are having fortnightly meetings with DEFRA and offering their own growth plan for the sector as a blueprint.
Issues like planning, water, productivity grants, the way relationships work in the supply chain, because the UK market is dominated by large retailers. The most immediate priority is to sort out these energy costs. One of the things that's doing at this moment is causing some of our larger businesses to consider, do they want to continue to invest in the UK? So, if we want to grow the UK industry, we've got to create the environment where people, think it's the right place to invest. A lack of support and productivity like they would have in Europe.
In particular in Holland, I believe they have support for growers in the greenhouse sector for things like energy. Is that right?
Yes. So the Dutch government has promised their greenhouse growers £165 million worth of support. It's matched by zero in the UK. So this is a really key disparity that we need our government to face into to actually make it sensible to invest in the UK.
We've heard that there is some consolidation in the industry as a result of trying to cope with some of these big pressures. Do you think it's a bit of a worry that we're perhaps heading towards having fewer larger fruit and veg businesses?
Well, over the past few decades, the UK industry has been consolidating. But that consolidation, I think, is an ongoing process. The thing to understand about these bigger businesses, it's not as though they're all concentrated in one part of the country. Large businesses will at various times be producing crops in several locations across the whole of the UK. So in terms of geographical and climate risks, they're minimised. The risk is more within the business itself.
Given the raft of quite serious challenges and the price of fertiliser, I guess, and access to capital, labour, wage costs, companies looking already to invest more overseas, do you feel that now is a moment where we need a bigger restructure of the fruit and veg sector in the UK rather than perhaps tweaking it or trying to improve what we already have?
I think it's more about development of what we've already got rather than radical restructuring. The one thing I would say is that this is going to be a test of the government's commitment to food security.
Martin Emmett, chair of the NFU Horticulture and Potatoes Board. But back to our own research. Tomatoes and every other greenhouse crop have been all over the news recently as growers have faced out-of-control fertiliser and gas prices as a result of the current madness in the Middle East. Producer Nina Pullman visited Flavour Fresh in Lancashire, the Northwest's answer to that Kentish garden.
This is the best time of year to look at a piccolo crop.
So this is a perfectly ripened piccolo tomato.
Piccolo variety, yeah.
So sweet. Wow.
And then hopefully a bit of balance straight after. But Sven's eyeing us jealously. My name's David Barker. I'm the crop consultant for Flavour Fresh Salads. We're in Melrose Nursery, just north of Southport, on the Lancashire Plain, and we grow approximately 20 acres of tomatoes over several sites.
My name is Sven Batke. I'm Associate Head of Research and Knowledge Exchange for Edgehill University, and I'm also the Chair of the Greenhouse Innovation Consortium.
Been a lot of talk of, the impact of the Middle East war. I mean, it all looks very calm up here in the Northwest. How has that been for you and for Flavour Fresh?
The immediate impact is the price of gas has gone up by about 50% more than we expected. And since gas is one of our major costs of production, it will cost us an awful lot of money.
And what about fertiliser? Does that come into it?
Yep, all the nutrients are provided by us from a central location, from raw ingredients.
It's quite amazing that tiny little pipe is linked to what's happening in the shipping route of Hormuz that many of us had never heard of and now is all over the news. And here we are in a tomato glasshouse in Lancashire.
And it seems each week when we check on the prices, it's gone up a bit more. That's a big worry for us going forward.
How many greenhouse growers are there? What kind of area of land are we talking in the UK?
So the area of land is surprisingly small. So the UK sector, we occupy less than 0.1% of agricultural land that's actually being used for production. So it's a very small industry in terms of its actual footprint. But it produces a very large proportion of fruit and vegetables in the UK. In terms of total area, there's over 2,000 hectares of greenhouses in the UK. In terms of food producing greenhouses, so we're talking strawberries, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, aubergines as well. It's around 800 to 900 hectares thereabouts in that area. So in the UK, a lot of the production is tomatoes. So that's one of the largest products we're actually producing. And it covers around, depending on which time of the year, of course, it's somewhere around between 15 to 20% of what we actually need in the UK. So we're only producing a very small proportion of what we're consuming in the UK at the moment.
That's really interesting. So about a fifth of what we eat in terms of tomatoes is produced here. Do you think there's capacity for more? I mean, from your point of view, Dave, do you think the demand is there? Could Britain produce more?
100% we could produce more, and the supermarkets would like us to produce more. But the sheer cost of building greenhouses is prohibitive at the moment, especially we're still recovering from the Ukraine crisis. The price of gas absolutely multiplied there about 4 or 5 times. We've now got this other crisis which isn't as severe, but how long is it going to last for?
So what would be most helpful? Is it more government support? Is it better prices from the supermarkets?
Yes, higher prices would obviously be what we'd want. But people aren't used to paying a lot of money for food, are they? So there's political ramifications for increasing the price of things like tomatoes. What would we like from the government? Maybe long-term loans than what we do from the banks. So if we could modernise the equipment we've got, build new greenhouses, that would increase production quite well.
And has the government in this country ever supported greenhouse production?
In fact, since the 60s, there hasn't really been any bigger support schemes specifically for food producing horticulture in the UK. So we kind of like did the mapping exercise, and it appears that over 70% of greenhouses are over 40 years old and coming more or less to the end of their lifespan. And now we basically asking government to support back into the system again to allow us to go for another 50, 60, 100, 200 years potentially.
I think the government needs to accept the bigger picture that we all need to increase the amount of vegetable, fruit and veg that we eat. And unless we support our industry, then it's all going to be imported. And we would argue that imported tomatoes in particular, they are different varieties. They are grown for, able to be transported long distances, so they're not as ripe when they're harvested. They don't have quite the same amount of antioxidants and lycopene in them.
So in fact, by supporting growers, we can overcome a lot of these health challenges the UK is facing already.
So horticulture holds the key, is what you're saying?
Yes, indeed.
Definitely.
And you've got greenhouses that are built sort of through the ages. So we're heading off to see what would have been the next one, but wasn't. We'll hear about that in a sec. We're on what looks like a kind of disused field. What are we looking at?
Well, we're looking at a field where we have planning permission to build a new greenhouse, but as I say, with the current climate, we won't be building on this until things improve.
How many more tomatoes would you have been able to grow?
7-acre unit. So the one we've just been in is 4.5 acres. So you're talking a significant increase.
Why was it? What happened?
The Ukraine crisis happened and the price of energy went massively high. So any money we had set aside was used to cover the price of gas at that point.
Now, the Middle East thing has happened. Has that kind of paused it again?
Yes. Yeah, in effect, that's the simple answer. It has. There's a lot of uncertainty.
Meanwhile, we buy a lot of tomatoes from southern Spain and Morocco and the rest of Europe, and could be coming from Lancashire, perhaps.
Yes, and to be honest, Morocco in particular and Tunisia area, they've had a terrible winter. Lots and lots of storms there. It's affected their production, which sort of increases the case for the UK to produce more of its own.
Food security is not part of the National Risk Register as an independent standalone pillar. It's not seen by government as a key fundamental risk for the United Kingdom. And that's kind of worrying.
worrying. But before we put those worries to the farming minister, we talked to someone who had analysed for us at the food programme where most of the fruit and veg we currently eat comes from.
I'm Jess Fredenberg. I'm a senior food and climate analyst at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, which is an NGO based in London. So I had a look at the top 5 most eaten fruit and veg for you. Top 5 veg, so in descending order, tomatoes, let's call tomatoes a vegetable for the sake of this argument, onions and leeks, lettuces and salads, carrots, courgettes and aubergines. Tomatoes alone account for around 13% of our veg consumption in the UK, so it's hugely important nutritionally. But around 80% of tomatoes are actually imported, and just 3 countries, Italy, Morocco and Spain, account for more than half of our tomato imports. If we look at lettuces and salads, more than half is imported, the majority from Spain. If we move on to fruit, we're looking even more vulnerable, Sheila. If we look at bananas, citrus and apples, just those 3 fruit areas alone make up half of the fruit that we're eating in the UK. If we take bananas there, like I said, 20% of the fruit that we eat, half of bananas are coming from just 2 countries, Colombia and Costa Rica.
The numbers are so startling. I mean, obviously we can't grow lemons and bananas here, but it is interesting that they make up such a high percentage of all the fruit we eat. How do these countries of origin rate in terms of climate resilience?
We have quite a lot of climate vulnerability here in all of these. Around 80% of all the fruit and veg that we import by value, so not just top 5, but all the fruit and veg, come from countries deemed to have a medium to high vulnerability to climate change. That's based on something called the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Rating, which essentially ranks countries' vulnerability to climate change in terms of their exposure to climate impacts and their ability to adapt. And if we look at where the top 5 most eaten fruit and veg are coming from, that's a lot of tomatoes from Morocco, a lot of onions from Egypt, for example. We know, according to the Met Office, that these are the North African region is expected to have hotter, drier days, more days over 35 degrees, problems with water shortages. So that's going to cause problems in terms of potentially shorter growing seasons and agriculture being constrained in other ways. In fact, the majority of fruit and veg that we import comes from the EU. And we might think that, the EU country is probably less at risk. So we know from the European Environment Agency that Europe is the fastest warming continent in the world. And already we're starting to see these impacts. So earlier this year, for example, there were big floods in Spain, Morocco and Portugal. We import, over £5 billion worth of food from these 3 countries: tomatoes, sweet peppers, cucumbers, strawberries, raspberries, etc. So we are really quite vulnerable there.
I mean, that's a pretty bleak picture. Given our reliance on those things, but we could change. How difficult would that change be?
Part of the reason why we're so vulnerable now, and perhaps one of the reasons that we also have lost quite a lot of our growers, is our changing taste in what we like to eat. So we've got to a point now where we have a real taste for tropical fruit and fruits grown in the Mediterranean. We've got a real taste for salady type crops that we can only grow here for some of the year or using a lot of energy. And of course, if we were to then start to try and expand the sort of field veg, like, broccoli, cabbages, that sort of thing, we'd have to start eating a lot more of those. And that's one of the challenges, is that it's not just a production challenge, it's what we eat as a country as well. Yeah, I do think this particular hit from the Iran war, following the Ukraine crisis, which followed COVID and all these sorts of things, I think that will probably start to kind of open up the conversation about decarbonising in the sector, because it's such an important sector for our food security and for our nutritional security as well. But it is quite energy intensive, and it's therefore important that we find a way for growers to be able to keep produce more of what they do, but do so in a way that minimises impact.
Jess Fredenberg. of the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. Over the last few years, the last few governments and this one, we haven't had much success in talking to ministers. So it seemed to us one of those weather vane moments when our request to talk to Farming Minister Angela Eagle about what's happening to our veg and fruit business got an immediate yes. Minister, we gather you've confirmed that the horticulture sector plan is actively underway, but we don't know much about the specifics. Can you give us some examples of what policies you and your team are considering for this plan?
Well, the first thing we're doing is consulting with the sector itself, because we want this growth plan to really be industry-led. I'm not pontificating to them about what they should be doing. So we're having meetings with them to talk about their view of what needs to be done to help them grow and improve resilience. We're at the beginning rather than the end of that work, but I have to say there's a lot of enthusiasm being shown by the sector as a whole that we're doing this work with them.
Well, you might even say, that we're kind of, BBC arm of doing the consulting, because we've been around some places. And one thing we hear is that horticulture, especially, ones that use glass houses for tomatoes and so on, that they need, they say, to be treated as an energy-intensive industry with the same financial help as other industries are getting.
Unfortunately, the current issue is that the industrial classifications don't really encompass food. And so we are having that discussion in government. We're very well aware of the issues that they're facing, and we're working with them to see what we can do to be of assistance in that area. Some of this is about those energy standing charges, which is about transforming the grid. It's not actually being caused by the increases in fuel prices, although it's being exacerbated by that.
If we're going to have a resilient food system, which is what, the present business in the Middle East and Ukraine have shown us, these things are really crucial.
A lower percentage of the fruit and veg that we eat in this country is now grown here. And I worry about that, which is why we are doing this work with the sector to see what we can do to improve our own resilience and our capacity to grow. Obviously, we want to grow things that can grow in our climate. We're not talking about mangoes or citrus. Quite happy to get those from hotter climes. But we should be capable of doing more. And I also think that the market garden sector, which has been a bit neglected, is worth having a look at as well.
Do you have any targets? Governments are big on targets. Increasing the production of British fruit and veg?
We're just scoping all of that out at the moment. So it's too early to ask me that question, except for me to say that I think that we need to look at how we can increase our resilience by making sure that that decline in the amount of fruit and veg that is grown and sold here is stopped and reversed.
Well, we've spoken to some of the British fruit and veg growers who are now investing and buying farms overseas, in West Africa, Portugal. Do you see this as something to worry about?
Well, I think that resilience in fruit and veg is also about importing, but I also want to see us growing more of our own and being able to grow more of our own, maybe having a new generation of growers that are enthusiastic about growing fruit and veg in this country. So I think there's a balance between those things.
Senegal and Portugal, they are about the things we could grow here mostly. What we also heard from growers is that the loss of funding from their producer organisations, which was an EU programme. Smaller growers struggling to stay in business and worried about industry consolidation. Does that situation bother you?
Well, look, big growers are an important part of the jigsaw, but so are small growers, which is why I was talking about the agroecological sectors and the market gardens, because I think that's often a good place for people to start if they're wanting to get a start in the sector. And at the moment, I think that there's more we could do to try and bring some of those on stream and try to create some circumstances where we can get more polytunnels up, where we can make sure that market gardens can be revived. And I know there's quite a lot of enthusiasm about that in some communities. And I think that could be a really good way of ensuring that we have a healthier supply of fresh fruit and veg for local communities that often don't get access to it. So short supply chains, local growing, very interested to see what we can do to encourage that.
Your department is one where, that it does seem that politicians in general are not terribly interested and, just want to get out quickly. Do you think you're going to hang around for long enough to make a difference?
Well, that's above my pay grade. I'm just going to do the best I can to get this enthusiasm going in the department to get this first sector growth plan for the Farming and Food Partnership Board up and running, so that I can demonstrate that what it's possible to do by bringing the industry together and having these sector-owned plans, so that we can have more of a strategic approach to what we do in this country rather than leave it all to the market. And I think it's probably the first time since the Second World War that we've had this approach. And I think the Farming and Food Board is about coordinating that. It's not a 5-year plan. I don't want you to think that, we're turning into that. But I just think we need more of a direction. I think, if anything, what's happened in the Strait of Hormuz and in the Middle East demonstrates that we do have to make sure we're resilient. I think in the past, because we've not had much trouble with food supply for many, many, many years, a lot of people have taken it for granted. It's always on the shelves. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to know how it got there. I'm not that complacent about it.
Dame Angela Eagle, DEFRA Farming Minister. Interesting to see if she and her uncomplacent attitude do stick around. It's true that the last time food and farming policy was built into the overall government strategy was immediately after World War II. But even before that time, there existed a now little-known but huge network of small-scale farms across England and Wales, supported by the government. Stella Swain knew about it because her grandparents were two of those farmers.
So the Land Settlement Association existed from around 1933 as basically a centralized way of controlling and organizing farming in this country. And it was formed by Ramsay MacDonald's Labour government as a way of addressing the high levels of unemployment due to the closure of the coal and steel mines. And they would provide them with training, with the land itself, with houses. They were about 4 to 5 acre plots of land, which could be farmed by a family each. So they weren't large farms, but they would have the advantages of collective farming, things like advertising, being able to share resources, having a centralized packing and servicing venue in the local area. So these were grouped in up to 100 of these small farms together, and they were run as a collective, as a cooperative. And it lasted until the 80s. So that was a really big chunk of time.
What was it like as a child to go to these places?
The glass houses at my granddad's house, it felt when I was a child like there were miles and miles of tomatoes inside them. And there was a period every summer where the tomatoes would be so ripe, they were literally dropping off the plant. So you could walk through and kind of brush your hand across it, and you would get handfuls and handfuls of different types of tomatoes. It was really incredible. He was so proud of feeding people. I think the Land Settlement Association as a project was something that a lot of people felt a huge amount of pride to be part of, because it was seen as a way of really feeding the country.
That went up to the market will provide, let's privatize everything years.
The closure period of the LSA coincided so much with the monopoly power of supermarkets really coming into its own in the late 70s, early 80s. So it was really the beginning of that era of importing a huge amount of our fresh fruit and vegetables, even the stuff that can be grown here very easily.
Given the Russian invasion of Ukraine, now what is happening in the Middle East, there are shocks to the food system. Is there a case for bringing them back?
Absolutely. I mean, the LSA wasn't a perfect system, but I do think this kind of form of centralized collective farming can offer a really important template. And it was a system that worked, right? For about half a century, it was producing a huge amount of fresh fruit and vegetables to provide food for the people of this country. I think it's becoming more and more clear to more and more people that we might need some form of mass transition of workers again during our lifetimes. And I think that the LFA, it trained miners to become farmers. And it's really an example of how you can take people and give them a fair chance at life, providing something really essential for the community. I mean, what's more essential than food?
After you published your piece in Vittles, did you have anybody getting in touch, interested in what had gone on then and thinking about the present?
Someone did reach out from the Green Party who was looking into writing their farming policy. And I think it's really amazing that any current political parties would be thinking about this kind of history. I think it is so important that the current policy reflects on what worked in the past and the things that could change for the future, because otherwise, how are we going to learn and do better?
Stella Swain. Another way was once possible. Back at Tim Chambers' farm in Kent, the future of England's garden seems a bit uncertain.
Cynicism and all that aside, if I came back in 10 years, would this be here, or will you think you'll have moved everything to Portugal or Spain or Morocco or wherever?
I think there will still be farming, but the market will determine how much of it is grown in the UK. If you go on the present trajectory, it'll be less, for sure. But I'm optimistic, and I think the pendulum is swinging quite a long way in one direction, and at a certain point it'll have to come back, and the market will determine how much we grow here. Not government policy. That will always be against us, I'm afraid.
Government policy always against us, and the market doing the deciding. A bleak picture, you might say, if you look at what the market has decided in other areas of the food system, dominating globally and at home what food is grown by whom, where and how. In this programme, we found British growers at a tipping point. Will the government use this chance to turn things around? You have to hope so.
I'm Noel Titheridge, and for BBC Radio 4 from Shadow World, this is Impulsive. What happens when someone's personality changes completely?
It was completely out of character. Never done it before, never done it since.
And it's because of a prescription drug.
I asked myself, why would you do such a thing? What were you thinking?
I've been uncovering the shocking side effects linked to medications called dopamine agonists. For BBC Radio 4, from Shadow World, this is Impulsive. Subscribe to Shadow World Impulsive now on BBC Sounds.